Hello everyone, I'm Old Blang, and today let's start something new. I'll share some stories about famous people or historical events with you guys from now on. So anyway, let's start with someone everyone is very familiar with, like Mr. Lu Xun. For Mr. Lu Xun, I'm sure you all are as familiar with him as can be. He was originally named Mixao Sanshu, later changed his name to Mixao. Judgment. The name Lu Xun is familiar to everyone, but Saka Sanshan's name is not well known. Mr. Lu Xun made significant contributions in literature creation, literary criticism and theory research, literary history research, translation art. Please give us a like, subscribe, share, and support Mirror and Points columns. Lu Xun's thoughts have had a profound impact on China's intellectual and cultural development since the May 4th movement. In fact, even in Korea and Japan's intellectual and cultural circles, he has a very important position and influence. You may not know that Mr. Lu Xun has this nickname. He's hailed as the writer who occupies the largest territory on the cultural map of East Asia in the 25th century. My favorite quote from Mr. Lu Xun is that real heroism lies in the courage to face obliquely, out of pure and clear blood. I think this sentence is also a summary that best describes Lu Xun's life. On September 25, 1881, a great man was born in Shaanxi City, inside. This person is Lu Xun. At the time of Lu Xun's birth, it was still a city in Shaanxi Prefecture. It was a prefecture-level city under the rule of the feudal Qing dynasty. At that time, although the power of the warlords had begun to be shaken, it still hadn't been overthrown, and was still clinging to power in a state of precarious existence. Lu Xun was born at this time, but even so. Their family still had 4 or 5 fields of water rice paddy. The problem was not with his living situation. His grandfather Zhao Kuoking was the prefect of Hanlin County. He is known for being a very honest and straightforward person, no matter what the situation was. A clean and honest official. His father's wrong boy was a scholar. This man himself became... He did like jesting and had a serious look, making it seem like a strict person. Being strict was never wrong, so he aimed to train Lu Xun into becoming strong and upright. He thought that if someone is bullied, it's because they're weak, and they should fight back harshly. But they shouldn't bully others without reason either. His father and grandfather's personalities had a big impact on Lu Xun as a child. Growing up in the household, Lu Xun was the eldest son. According to local superstition, the eldest son is not easy to raise, so by the time he was less than a year old, his grandfather had him taken to Longquang Temple, which was just a short distance from their home. That's all. But pronounced in a local dialect, these two characters sounded very similar to Rain Umbrella, making it a bit of an awkward term. So not long after, so he changed the character name from Yazoo to Yesiai. It was not until Lu Xun was 18 years old that he changed his name from Mixulivan Rai. So the common claim we hear today is that Lu Xun's original name was Zayap Shorn. Lu Xun himself described Zhou Shorn as a boy who was incredibly intelligent and had an extremely strong memory, almost reaching the level of being able to memorize everything at first sight. It is said that when Lu Xun was around 7 years old, he began attending private school. His first teacher was Master Chen. This teacher had a vast collection of books, including an illustrated edition of the Shang Heidi Jing, and the illustrated atlas of birds and beasts, all books with beautiful illustrations that children often love reading. Lu Xun was no exception. So in his eyes, these illustrated books full of strange and exotic creatures, flowers, trees, birds, beasts, fishes. After teaching him for a while, Master Yu Tian gave way to a paternal uncle and great uncle of the same surname as Lu Xun's family, named Mr. Zijing. This teacher not only had limited knowledge, but also had a somewhat strange personality. As for this teacher's character being very strange, his 2 sons rarely visited. He lived alone in the house, which was in a state of disrepair due to its age, making the place seem very eerie. Lu Xun and his classmates were not particularly fond of this place. So they would often go to the White Grass Plain for activities. This White Grass Plain is actually quite dull, and especially during winter, it becomes even more mundane. However, one day the White Grass Plain welcomed a young boy who had just arrived from the countryside. His name was Run Tu, and Run Tu's father worked as a laborer in Lu Xun's home. Run Tu was 2 years older than Lu Xun, making him almost an older contemporary. So the two quickly became close friends, and Lu Xun often introduced Run Tu to things he had never experienced before, back in the countryside. And Run Tu also often told Lu Xun about some things that weren't familiar to city folk like them. Of all the things, it was probably Run Tu's nighttime stories during the summer nights that left the deepest impression on Lu Xun. The old man brandishing a steel rod, running towards the tea shop where Run Tu's father sat. In Lu Xun's young mind, whether it was Run Tu or his father, were all very knowledgeable individuals. However, during that era, due to their different family background, the distance between Run Tu and Lu Xun grew wider with time. When they met again, 20 years later, Run Tu now dressed Lu Xun as old master. He even made his son kowtow to Lu Xun, something that filled the latter with a deep sadness he had never known before. After studying under this gentleman, Lu Xun then entered into the era of reading and writing in the 3 Pavilion. The gentleman in the 3 pavilions were an elderly man with gray hair, thick frame glasses, and a tall and thin build. His name was Xu Jing Wu, and this elderly gentleman was learned in simple money. He treated everyone with great kindness, but the rules of the three pavilions were extremely numerous. You could say it was the most strict rather than class time. Outside of class hours, Lu Xun's favorite pastime was copying books and the ones he liked in particular. During the process of copying, he gradually developed a fondness for gardening, and young Lu Xun was almost more of a knowledgeable plant than a person. Lu Xun's limited life laid the foundation for his whole life. This would often leave a beautiful memory in his mind when recalled later on. And it also brought him inspiration for creation. As he began writing at the age of 13, Lu Xun then started to interact with society and began to feel the sorrow and hardships of the world. In that year, when Lu Xun was 13 years old, his grandfather was sentenced to prison due to a case at the Public Security Office. This was a very unfortunate thing for his family, as it occurred during the feudal dynasty's rule, when imprisonment often meant deprivation of income and livelihood. In families at that time, if someone committed a crime, there was a high likelihood that the whole family would be subject to full door clearance, meaning to kill all members of the family as a punishment. This meant that Lu Xun was sent to live with his uncle's family. As we've mentioned before, from what I know, the household of Lu Xun was left with only a small amount of land, around 450 mil for transfer. Since Lu Xun's grandfather was imprisoned, the family had to gather some money to bribe those officials and try to get him out. That was a very difficult time. It's only possible to let the grandfather avoid some misfortunes in prison by gathering money over time. The family's economic situation also gradually became more difficult. Besides these, because their family was one of the reputable clans, they didn't have any connections or support from them during such a hard time. At that time, their grandfather was in office and they were able to get by. But now that the old master is in jail, things have become much harder. So naturally, some relatives from afar couldn't help but cast a critical eye on them. This led to Lu Xun, from a very young age, often feeling like a deep sense of sadness in his heart. Because of the changes that occurred within the family, Lu Xun's father changed in character. He often went out drinking, suddenly got angry for no reason, and his physical health was gradually deteriorating. He kept calling in doctors one after another, but none of them were really skilled or effective. And their treatments were very expensive. Despite the long duration of treatment, Lu Xun's father showed no improvement at all. These quacks even said that Lu Xun's father's illness was likely due to some kind of past karma or fault from a previous life. However, no matter how they looked at it, Lu Xun's father eventually passed away in this way. He left the world. Sometime later, his grandfather was finally released from prison. At that time, Lu Xun was around 15 years old, since he's the eldest son. So part of the responsibility for living fell on his shoulders because he had to take care of his father and try to find a cure. He was almost always running back and forth between pawn shops and medicine stores. He had to deal with loan shop account clerks who were menacing and looked at him with contempt as they took the money, and then had to go to pharmacies to buy medicine back and forth all day long. So this was the Lu Xun of that time. The family's household was once considered comfortable and prosperous, but as life fell into financial difficulties, Lu Xun was deeply aware of the harsh reality. Later on, he summarized it bluntly in 2 sentences in Wild Rash or supplement. He said, "Who has fallen from being wealthy to being poor?" I guess that on this rugged path, perhaps you can see the true face of humanity. Although he had endured unprecedented hardship, his experiences only hardened Lu Xun and strengthened his will and character, and also improved his ability for observation and analysis of social life. Since the passing of his father, Lu Xun never set foot in the free teacher school again. However, he had never let his guard down when it came to learning. After some time, he made a choice. He decided to step out of his own circle, to step out beyond the threshold of a feudal patriarchal society, and went to Nanjing, entering the Jinggan Waterway Academy to study for the Navy, as well as being free of tuition fees was another very important reason. This year's Lu Xun was 18 years old, and he changed his name to Zuru Kim, but also used the pen name Mixasu Shiren. This was also the same year, 1898. Please be sure to like, subscribe for, and reward us for supporting the Mirror and this column series. This experience had a lasting impact on Lu Xun. 18-year-old Lu Xun arrived in Nanjing, and it was not just that he was searching for his own path, but rather he was on a quest to find the country's China out of its darkness. The year he arrived in Nanjing coincided with the most intense peak of the Wuxi reform movement that had engulfed China. Although this movement ultimately failed and its guiding ideology was flawed, however, it brought about a lot of impacts, such as the opening of many new modern schools, and the progressive cultural tide was being disseminated within these very schools. It is also during this time that Lu Xun entered Jinan and Waterway Academy. While studying here, Lu Xun was extremely diligent in his studies, and at the same time lived a very difficult life. Despite the majority of expenses being covered by the government, their subsidies for students were quite negative. Essentially, they weren't able to buy so much good stuff, and then Lu Xun didn't have the money either. So by winter, he was unable to buy thick clothes, which led him to develop the habit of eating spicy peppers to keep himself warm. And even became a habit, which unfortunately caused him considerable damage to his stomach's digestive function. Gradually, Lu Xun began to develop a sense of dissatisfaction towards Jingnan Waterway Academy. And by the second year, he already transferred school. He transferred to Shaanxi Mining Military School, affiliated with Jingnan Land Force Academy, where he studied mining and military discipline. After arriving there, he realized that the things being taught were completely different from what he had learned before. When I was studying at the Water Academy earlier, we studied English, but in this place, they taught German and also required them to learn arithmetic. So physics on top of that. He also studied anatomy and physiology in his own free time here. This made him think about his father's illness and begin to realize the despicable nature of quack doctor. During this time of study here, Lu Xun had the opportunity to come into contact with progressive thought current. He came across a book that greatly piqued his interest called Omniscient. This was a work by English biologist Herbert Spencer, advocating for Spencer's ideas that were related to Darwin's theory of evolution. The book that he read was a translation by Yan Fo, a representative figure of the self, strengthening movement, also known as the existential Weepa, in 1898. The new idea of survival of the fittest in the book shook Lu Xun out of his calm demeanor. He started thinking about China, and also Mr. Lu Xun, to realize that if China continued with its outdated and traditional methods, and in this fiercely competitive world today, it would be impossible for them to continue existing. In order to escape from this harsh reality, one must resolutely discard the stagnant and outdated things that are no longer applicable, and one must absolutely not surrender to invading foreign power. The theory of evolution by Darwin had a very profound impact on Lu Xun. In the later anti-imperialist and anti-feudal struggles, he would often employ this weapon. Until later, when he accepted the updated, more scientific Marxist-Leninist ideology. Lu Xun was studying here until 1902, when he finally graduated from there. However, he was then faced with a new problem as to where to go next. China's self-strengthening movement had already declined significantly, and by 1900, the capital city, Beijing, fell under the Eight-Nation Alliance. The Boxer Protocol was signed in 1901. And that's what the situation was at the time. Taking a high-pressure policy against the government inside and suppressing the Boxer movement. In China itself, it was a dark time for those seeking scientific and self-strengthening truths, like Lu Xun himself. Under the circumstances, studying abroad seemed to be a more suitable option at that time. At the age of 22, Lu Xun went to Japan, unlike most other students who left for study abroad in places like France or Germany. After arriving in Tokyo, he quickly shaved his queue, a symbol of imperial obedience and traditional Chinese hairstyles, which was a shocking sight in the conservative Chinese society at that time. The days spent studying in Tokyo were rather lonely for Lu Xun, so he used reading as a way to alleviate this loneliness, and often socialized with new friends he met along the way, talking about human nature, the faults and defects of the people, and even discussing ways to transform them. In Lu Xun's mind, he believed that true revolutionaries were Sun Yat, Sen and Tsang Taixuan. Sun Yat's revolutionary democratic thoughts had an impact on Tokyo. In 1903, Tsang Taixuan, Zhegang Taiyuan, organized a revolutionary organization called Taiyongtong, which Lu Xun later became a member of. He studied Japanese at the Fujian School for Han Wusu House 2 years and more. Lu Xun decided to pursue a career in medicine as his next step of study in the autumn of 1904. Lu Xun went to Sendai and had two main reasons for choosing this medical school. The first being his father's death after falling victim to incompetent doctors. And the second reason was that during this time in China, it was because of its backwardness and lack of knowledge that it had become vulnerable to invasion by foreign power. This is something he deeply felt himself and couldn't tolerate it. So he planned to go back home after completing his studies as a doctor to rescue patients who had suffered like his father or to save lives during war. He hoped to be able to use medicine to rescue China. In this school, Lu Xun not only received a number of unfamiliar teachers, but also met Mr. Fujiwara. This Mr. Fujiwara had studied Chinese himself, and thus greatly respected China's ancient sages, which is why he became very close to Lu Xun, and later regularly collected his lecture note, and each time would thoroughly review and correct the entire script in red ink. During his second year at this school, a thing happened which was a shocking event that had a profound impact on Lu Xun's thought, and hence changed the course of his life forever. The incident happened the same year. A new microbiology course was added. And one day it ended. However, before the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the teacher suddenly screened a few movie clips, which happened to be about the recently ended Russo-Japanese War. So most of them were Japanese war propaganda videos showcasing Japan's victory over Russia. In one of the clips, there was a segment showing Chinese people among them. The main point of the clip was that a Chinese person had been spying for the Russian Tsar's military, and he was caught by the Japanese army and was about to be executed with a gunshot. And in front of a crowd of Chinese people, this was a humiliation for Lu Xun. And every time someone shouted, "Long live the Emperor," which sounded like a triumphant shout in Lu Xun's ear, it was maddeningly piercing and lingered in his mind for many days, preventing him from settling down. He suddenly realized that to change the way the common people thought is the changing of people's morals, and what can effectively change morals is art. That's why he wanted to promote an artistic movement at that time, during his spring break in that year. Lu Xun had already thought about what would happen after the next school year, so he went to find Mr. Fujiwara, told him his thoughts, and at the same time asked to be excused from school. Mr. Echinoda and stopped him, and a few days before Lu Xun left Sendai, he gave him a photo. On the back of the photograph were written just two characters, Shidabar. In May 1918, Lu Xun published his first short story, Diary of a Madman, in the journal New Youth magazine, and from there, it started spreading rapidly. This was also a milestone in Chinese literary history. It established the revolutionary tradition of modern Chinese realistic literature and laid down its initial foundation. That same year, he published some essays in New Youth magazine, which were his earliest examples of literary nonfiction. In this way, Lu Xun took up another tool and became the lifelong battle weapon for him. Later, Lu Xun participated in the work of Cultural Revolution. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share it, and support Mirror Thought and Point Points column after the Diary of a Madman. Lu went on to publish more short stories such as The Kuchen and Prescription in the New Youth magazine. They deeply expose the true face of feudal society. Lu Xun's works are very profound in content and also highly perfect in form. So it moved the hearts of some young readers, and soon a batch of new literary works came up after Lu Xun. In this way, with the continuous publication of these works, they sparked a patriotic wave against imperialism and feudalism and spread Marxism. In the autumn of 1920, Lu Xun went to Beijing University's Chinese Literature Department to teach the history of Chinese novels. From then on, Lu Xun not only contacted his readers through his writings, but also appeared personally in the classroom every time he taught. He would always receive a warm welcome, and the classrooms as well as the corridors outside were crowded with students. In October 1920, Lu Xun also wrote 2 more short stories. Though he always exclusive drama, Lu Xun his character because he always adhered to the theory of evolution. So he put all his hopes on the young people. So that is to say, through education and reforming the new generation, you can achieve social progress. He thought that in this rotten feudal society, only the young people were the last hope. After creating his hometown story, Lu Xun also wrote his most renowned book, which had a huge impact. It not only stands as an iconic work in the history of new literature, but also served as a cornerstone for modern Chinese realist literature. And he also gained international recognition and praise from progressive and revolutionary writers. With an international reputation, Lu Xun not only became one of the greatest Chinese writers, but also in a worldwide context. He is also considered one of the greatest realist writers of the 20th century on September 19, 1936. Lu Xun passed away due to lung disease on that day. His doctor was a man of great simplicity and greatness. He went to learn and work for the liberation of his country and its people. Meanwhile, he also dedicated his entire life to this cause. In his will, he told his family that they could accept money from old friends at his funeral, but no one else should be solicited for donation. Bury me as soon as possible. Don't hold any memorials. Forget about me as soon as possible would be best. After his death, his friends established the Lu Xun Memorial Society, whose members included Sun Yat-sen's wife Song Changling, Kai Yunpei, and Zhou Fang Zhou, and others. A total of 13 people came to pay their respects on the very first day. After his passing, among them were over 5,000 people who shed tears in mourning. Not even the men who carried his coffin that Pang Xankaden, and others were spared. Cheered. It can be said that the number of people paying their respects grew larger day by day, even though Lu Xun had forever departed, but his spirit and soul will live on forever. At the end of this video, let us all pay a tribute to this greatest national hero together. And so concludes today's tale. We bid you adieu. Until next time.